Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
At a New Age festival in Byron Bay, journalist Anke Richter is finding her awakening when she meets a woman, a survivor of the New Zealand sex cult Centrepoint, who will change the course of her life and career. Over the next 10 years, Anke pursues a labyrinthine investigation into how and why cults seduce and trap and destroy otherwise ordinary people, asking what the line is between tribe and cult, participant and perpetrator, seduction and sexual abuse. Her view on her own explorations starts to change. From the emotional and criminal carnage of Auckland's Centrepoint to an anti-cult conference in Manchester, the infamous Osho's ashram in India, the tantric Agama yoga school in remote Thailand, and culminating in a visit to the fundamentalist Christian enclave Gloriavale on the west coast of the South Island, Anke uncovers a disturbing pattern of violence and many untold stories of suffering. Cult Trip is a powerful exploration of what really goes on inside the spiritual groups we all call cults, and how to reckon with their aftermath. Hello listeners, and welcome to this week's mini-series with special guest, author and journalist Anke Richter. This talk with Anke, regarding her newest publication Cult Trip, was a very personal one for me. We discussed the nuances of working in the cult education and recovery space alongside survivors who have endured the most testing and abusive environments. Speaking with Anke, someone who was also drawn into this world through a want to understand the subject on a broader spectrum, left me feeling in awe of Anke's passion, her compassion, and how eloquently she can summarize her experiences. It is also a beacon of strength to survivors around the world that some journalists can and will do the right thing in bringing survivor stories to the forefront with the utmost care for the survivors themselves, even if it is at great personal cost. August is International Cult Awareness Month. If you haven't yet, please visit internationalcultawareness.org or follow the links in the episode description to find resources of support and calls to action in furthering exposure of cult research, education and support for survivors. And a very special warm welcome to newest patron and last week's guest, Andrew Pledger, who has released the first 4 episodes of his new deep dive podcast, Surviving Bob Jones University. It is an incredible series production, and I know so much has gone into this, so please go and check it out on all podcast platforms today. Now, without further ado, here is Anke. So hello, Anke, and welcome to the show. I am so looking forward to chatting today after recently finishing your new book, Cult Trip. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Oh, kia ora, Casey. Kia ora is hello from New Zealand, where I live. I'm a journalist. I'm a foreign correspondent. I'm originally from Germany. This is my 4th book, but maybe the most impactful one, which was just released as an international bestseller paperback in the UK this year and last year in New Zealand.
That is a wonderful introduction. Absolutely amazing. Journalism is something that I personally find really interesting, and sometimes get asked, are you a journalist? And I say, I don't think so, although sometimes maybe a little bit, and I'm not really too sure. Is journalism something you always felt drawn towards, or is it a position that you accidentally fell into?
I've done journalism actually since my last year at school. So I've been doing it for over 30 years. Was curious about people, didn't want to go to university at the time. So I did an internship that turned into a media apprenticeship in Los Angeles for a foreign correspondent there. And interestingly enough, it's also where I think I had my first, I'm not cult experience, but at least I brushed, against a cult there, which was Scientology, because they were all over all over the show. So I've already been freelancing since I left school, and then started with a newspaper in Cologne, my hometown back in Germany, and then moved into magazines, and later I did a lot of celebrity journalism, very different to what I'm doing now, actually. Worked for TV, and then later when I moved to New Zealand with my family, about 20 years ago, actually, I started working here as a foreign correspondent. But the cult journalism, if that's what you mean, that's sort of, I fell into that more accidentally. That wasn't anything I'd ever planned, that I would end up writing a book about it and doing so much research about it. Yeah.
What is the role of a foreign correspondent? Because I feel like it sounds like the type of like a consulate, but I don't feel like that's the same sort of thing. You know, like people that are dotted around in different people's countries, like, oh, I need to go and see like the UK representative over here in Norway kind of thing. Like, how does it all work?
I mean, it's not completely wrong when you say dotted around the country. So I'm a freelance foreign correspondent or freelance correspondent for the German media. So as a foreign correspondent, you live in the country. I mean, not everyone lives in the country. A lot of people like Christian Annenpour just, are being parachuted in, so to speak. But I actually live in the country that I report about and write about. So I report back for the German media about things that happen here, like big news, like the mosque shooting in 2019 or the Christchurch earthquakes, which I actually lived through myself, so I was quite personally affected, but also like everyday, more like background stories, social issues. I have a regular column for a German newspaper. I do big features. So yeah, it's actually a great job. It's like any other journalism, but your readership is 18,000 kilometers away in my case. Yeah.
That sounds so good. And then, like, there's always loads of different things happening. So you're not always stuck in the same type of storytelling. And I imagine that it helps to keep things fresh. And I imagine you may have even felt a little bit smug reporting over to Germany that there weren't any COVID cases where you were living at one point. I think you might be the
Yeah.
only place in the world.
Yeah, we had it pretty good actually during the pandemic. I have to say, at least those Kiwis who were stuck here or who live here, the ones that couldn't get back, not so great for them, because they're not having a closed border, which was absolutely the right thing to do at the time and really, really saved us, from so much that, you in the UK and other countries had to suffer through. Yeah, but it had the flip side also, that some people couldn't come back. But overall, I'm just really, really grateful that we, had Jacinda Ardern as our prime minister, and her really sensible approach to COVID, and her, it was, I don't know, feeling proud is probably not the right word, but I'm grateful, that I was here and not some other places in the world where that wasn't possible. Yeah.
When I was reading Cult Trip, it felt very refreshing and insightful as a investigative journalistic piece that was slightly memoiristic and had elements of other people's stories and experiences and testimonies, but with your narrative and your personal thoughts and feelings tying the book together. And different to other investigative journalistic books about cults that I've read, it is made up of several different groups and experiences that you've dived into, which I really appreciated. It was like an anthology of different groups tied together with your own perspective. And you didn't hold back on how you felt as the narrator as well, which gave the book another layer of insight into how these groups affect people, not only as the events unfold, but really how people are impacted decades after these things have happened. And it's an incredible book. I highly recommend everybody pick up a copy of Cult Trip.
Wow, thank you so much. That really, you've just summed it up beautifully. I feel really seen. I want to copy that. I want to copy that and put it as a blurb on the back.
That would be great. I'll send you the type up later. How far into your journalism were you when you had a chance encounter in Byron Bay in Australia?
So that was 10 years ago. So I was already well over 20 years into my journalism. So I wasn't a rookie. I wasn't a newcomer. I've done a lot, and I hadn't planned at that time to write anything about cults. I had already written 3 books. They've all been published in Germany, new nonfiction books. And then I went to this New Age festival in Byron Bay. It's still going. I'm actually going back to Byron Bay later this year, not to the same festival though. And I met a woman there from a former sex and therapy cult called Centrepoint here in New Zealand. And she was also from New Zealand. So someone introduced us and we talked, and I was quite fascinated. I mean, I was fascinated with everything at this festival. First, I was really, really skeptical because I'm not very esoteric or New Age. And, I always, I don't know, I had my preconceptions, let's put it that way, prejudices about the neo-tantra scene. And I went there because some friends went, and I went along, and I was curious. And also I had I had pitched this to a magazine to write about, anonymously, mind you, under pseudonym. I wasn't brave enough to put my name to a story about, a festival with lots of sort of sexy massage workshops and deep breaths, release your inner orgasm, Kundalini energy, all these things. I thought, no, that's a bit cringy, but I still want to go there. I want to write about it, but maybe not under my name. And then I met Anke there, Anke Mikkel-John, and she told me pretty early on that she had grown up in a kind of sex cult. And I thought, oh, what, where? In New Zealand? Yeah, she said Centrepoint. I had never even heard about it at that time. And then I met her again a few months later. And in the meantime, Bert Potter, the guru, the founder of that community, had died. And maybe that also, suddenly he was in the news, and I became more aware of, oh, that's what Centrepoint was. Oh, and Angie was part of that. And then I met her again, and I had the idea I said, look, why? It's weird, no one's written a book about Centrepoint, because there was a similar community at the same time at the other end of the world where I come from. We're not in Germany, but in Austria, and lots of Germans were involved, and that was the Otto Mühl commune. And they were notorious for their extremely enforced, I wouldn't even say polyamory, but anti-monogamy, yeah, it's maybe the right word, and promiscuity, and just sort of tribal living. And I mean, I was really familiar with them, and it was always fascinating. I thought, hang on, this is a similar thing here in New Zealand. Why has no one written a book about it? And I kind of naively thought I could just do this, and I actually got a publisher, a really good publisher, and a contract, and Angie wanted to tell her story, and that's how it all started. So I actually started off with a book that I never finished in the end, but we can talk about that later, yeah, why it all fell over. But yeah, this is how I was sucked into cult journalism. Yeah.
It sounds as if there was the potential for maybe 20 different books to be written about this one festival and all of its intrinsic elements, because if you were to really explore all of the corners of a new age festival, I can only begin to imagine that there were so many different things that you could have, so many different rabbit holes. Like, what is Kundalini energy? Where does it come from? And what groups use it as influence today? Even that on its own is like a whole thing. And so many parts of your book talking about the power of orgasm, of course. I was thinking of One Taste, and there's a lot talked about with One Taste in Cult Trip as well. And I wasn't aware that there were other groups that basically use exactly the same teachings and rhetoric. So it's all just copied from the same playbook. So that's what's really interesting about Cult Trip as well. There's other things just kind of thrown in, peppered in throughout. And even though the focus might be, we're talking about Centrepoint, there's also other things that are mentioned. And if you are somebody that is interested in the subject of cults, you'll recognize different words, groups, and terminologies, and you're almost like, oh, and that's awesome.
Yeah, you see the patterns, right? You pick up patterns, yeah. And it took me a while to pick up the pattern, because I didn't go to that festival because I knew a lot about cults or these kind of groups. I knew quite a bit about Scientology. I read lots of books about them, and I was more familiar with those kind of 70s, 80s, 90s psycho cults. But that going to this festival didn't actually seem culty to me. Something there really hooked me in. I had my sort of blissful awakening after a session of ecstatic dance, and I dropped my cynicism and something clicked. And I think I had my blinkers on straight from the beginning that the scene that I was moving in could have culty elements, while I was, with my professional hat on, I was really interested in this former, sex cult teenager, Angie, who told me she'd been the concubine of the commune. And so I was drawn to her story professionally. And maybe, I don't need to, psychoanalyze myself, but if I would do that, I would think, well, maybe because something was pulling me already in the direction of this new group and this new movement for very personal reasons, not with a critical sort of cult lens on. Maybe that's also the reason why I was fascinated by Centerpoint, because I thought, well, hang on, these people back then, or what they wanted, or why they went into all these new age or human potential therapy workshops, and why they opened up their relationships, and why they wanted to live communally. Maybe they weren't actually that different from the kind of people who I was hanging out with at that festival. And therefore I wanted to, I guess, to unpack and get behind why did this big utopian dream turn in such a collective nightmare. So there was always a bit more, I had skin in the game, so to speak. Yeah, there was always a bit more than just, oh, this is a good story, I'm a journalist, let's investigate that. I had some deeper personal interest that maybe I wasn't even really aware of at the time.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
I wonder what it looks like for a journalist with a book deal who's going to jump into the subject of Centerpoint with Angie as kind of, I suppose, at the start, the center of the story and what surrounds Angie as an individual, and then realizing that it was a monster that you were kind of walking straight into the mouth of the jaws of the beast. Can you talk the listeners through what it looks like to prepare for an investigation? Do you have an idea of a plan and how you gather resources, or is it just you go to Angie and Angie says, oh, you might be interested in speaking to so-and-so, or gives you a list of names and you try to track them down? I just would not have any idea how to start, and I'm really interested in learning about how you do that in your own mind.
Well, it's a little bit more complex than ideally, I would have just gone to Angie. She would have told me her story. That's what I thought we should do. We go, I write it all down. She gets to read it all. I sprinkle in some facts about Centerpoint, and her personal story is the book. Yeah. And just after I was signed up by my publisher, another book came out. Actually, the first book about Centerpoint came out, written by a victim as well, a teenager who'd been sexually abused there in one of the drug experiments they did at Centerpoint. They took MDMA together with teenagers. She had been one of them, and her book came out, and it was just a slim book. It could have been edited better, but for me, it was like, oh gosh, there is actually a book now, a victim story. What am I doing telling Angie's story? And my publisher said, no, keep going, just make it bigger, just make it wider, just find more people. And a few weeks or months, a few months into it all, the editor at my publishing house quit. I was completely on my own, and the investigation suddenly got so much wider. So like you said, exactly like how it was, I started off with Angie, and then there was Angie who said, you should speak to so-and-so and so-and-so. And then I found Someone gave me a book that had been written about Centerpoint, the only other book before everything fell over, that had been written in the 1980s. And it was actually a piece of PR, really, to maybe whitewash them a bit, because there were all the allegations about the sexual abuse of children. Just to put that out for those who are not familiar with Centerpoint, it ended up being a massive sex abuse scandal. And 1/3 of the children at Centerpoint had been potentially sexually abused. And 10 or more people actually were arrested and went to jail for their sexual abuse and for manufacturing drugs. So, just to put that out, that is what Centerpoint in New Zealand is mostly known for, unfortunately. And of course, it was also a home for many, many people. So that in itself is complex. So I started off finding my way into this labyrinth. And one of the first people I got in touch with was the author of that book, Inside Centerpoint. And he had actually lied for Bert Potter in court when it came to the drugs, and said, they were just placebos. So they all had this party line from Centerpoint court that they all lied for Bert, for the guru, and said, they never manufactured drugs. These were just placebos to do some studies on how people come up on drugs if they're not drugs, whatever. He lied. Then he fled the country, went to Australia. He's actually a retired therapist there now. And I tracked him down, and he said he's never spoken to a journalist from New Zealand because they're all prejudiced, and he doesn't trust the New Zealand media. But he spoke to me because I'm originally from Germany. So that was a massive door opener. I flew over to Melbourne, visited him, and it's hard to say whether he was trying to play me. I think to some degree he was, but he also gave me his unpublished manuscript of his Years with Bert Potter, which was it's almost like, wow, I struck gold right from the get-go. And then doors kept opening because he also introduced me to some of the people from his faction. So Centerpoint fell over. It was shut down 23 years ago when the trust was, the Centerpoint Trust was transformed, and the last people basically had to leave there. But the raids and everything, the drug raids, the arrests, all that happened in the mid-90s. So this also when a lot of people left. So just, do the math. It's been a long, long time since everything fell over, and it has never really been addressed. And here I am all these years later, decades later, poking around the outsider, knocking at people's doors, tracking them down, thinking, not naively, but thinking, maybe, finally they can talk about this. And I lifted the lid off of some really big trauma, and a lot of people freaked, and a lot of people weren't happy to talk. And then and there are all these factions now. There were already factions back then at Centerpoint, but now over all these years, people are so entrenched in their own narratives. And there are a couple of different narratives. One narrative, for instance, is that these young girls, these teenagers, the frisky teenagers from Centerpoint, who seemed so, so sexual and were treated like women, and they could have whatever they wanted. Well, a lot of them choose to be sexual with much older men as a survival strategy. Yeah, a 12-year-old being the quote unquote mistress of the 60-year-old guru, that was absolutely her survival strategy, and she took him to court later. So the narrative of the Bert followers was always, these girls wanted this. They said yes. They had a choice. It was only the social workers and the police who turned them, who turned a beautiful thing into something criminal later on. Yeah, we had the free love commune here. We were liberating everyone, and it's only the outside society who got it wrong. And these things happen everywhere, and stop pointing the finger at Centerpoint. And that narrative still runs till today, even with the second generation. Yeah, for instance, some of the children of the main guru and the perpetrators have the same narrative, and it's maybe some form of self-preservation or being able to still love their family if they stay in that camp. But these camps, some of them are not, they're definitely not talking to each other. Then you have the victims who took perpetrators to court, people went to jail. So there's been this massive legal reckoning at some stage a long time ago, and since then there has been no form of closure, or the German word that we have, Vergangenheitsbewältigung, which means basically coming to terms with the past, which is a term that applies to how Germans had to deal with their World War II history, and facing it and being honest about it and making repairs and somehow, redeem themselves. And that never happened with Centerpoint. So that was the territory I was moving in, Casey, all these years later. And doors closed on me, doors opened. I went down so many labyrinths and corridors and opened doors, and there were cesspools behind them. Not always was their goal. So that became my investigation, and it was huge. Plus, I had hundreds and hundreds of pages of court files. I had unpublished memoirs, not just the one, others as well. I didn't exactly have a murder war, but I kind of had a murder war on paper, around me. I had diagrams of who was connected to whom. I had the database of all the old Centerpoint magazines. So that in itself, you find all these names and all these photos, and then you try and find them, these people today, through social media. But it's always tricky because you don't know you get an idea who they were back then. Okay, they were in that leading role, or they were running workshops, or where they were the children of a perpetrator. But then you don't know 20 years later, when you find them somewhere, how do you approach them? Do they hate Centerpoint? Do they not, are they happy a journalist comes and finally exposes more of it? Or do they freak and don't want their darkest secret to be revealed, that they live there? Or are they defensive of it? I never know. I never knew, and I made a few mistakes in the beginning where I was so outspoken or too clear in my emails, where I actually used words like, sex crimes or so much. I mean, people went to jail for these crimes. They're actually on the record. They were, this is, I didn't make this up. People went in court. But even that got big reaction from people who then didn't want to talk to me because I used that word, and then I'm clearly biased and I don't understand what it really was. So I was constantly juggling this. It was a minefield I was moving in for about 2 years. Yeah.
When you were writing Cult Trip, or when you were investigating Centerpoint, there were times where you talked about all of this material that you'd been given for your investigation to piece everything together, and there were boxes and books and tapes and diaries and testimonies and all of these interviews that you'd done with all of these different people. What has happened to all of that stuff? Do you still have it in a few boxes in your shed? Just
I'm just leaning down to see if the box is still under my desk over there, and I think I've actually finally moved the big Centerpoint box into the attic, because when my book, the first book, the Centerpoint book, is actually not the book that's come out now, because I had to stop that after 2 years. I actually had to stop. It was too much, but I can talk about that later. But that box has finally gone up to the attic. When the legalizing for Cult Trip was done, when everything was ticked off, when I knew, okay, this is the book's going into print, I can't change anything anymore, unless someone comes and wants to sue me or so. Then I probably have to pull that box out again and prove that, these are the transcripts of my interviews, and those are the old articles where I found all this in the archives. But no, the box is on the attic where I think it belongs. But yeah, it is a lot of material that I have there.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
It reminded me a lot about an individual who was at Centerpoint, who I only know of because of the New Zealand media outlet Stuff. They did a podcast with Adam Dudding called The Commune. And when I was listening to Barry tell her story about how she was the person that kept all the information about Centerpoint, wrote the Centerpoint magazine, put everything together, sent it all out to print, and who has kept all of these physical archives. I mean, I can't imagine how Adam Dudding felt walking into Barry's home and being like, oh my goodness, everything is here. So you talk about Barry in Cult Trip, and it's a really interesting interaction. One of the times that you mention Barry in the book, because a a female victim of Centrepoint, a survivor of Centrepoint who was treated horrifically and had some really awful experiences, sits down with Barry. And I wondered if you could just talk the listeners through what that felt like, being present in that very layered and difficult atmosphere, because there were so many moving parts in that one room.
Yes, that was a really significant meeting. So I had sat in Barry's lounge before as well, leaving with stacks and stacks of her materials and her photocopies. And I mean, you were just asking about Adam Dubbing stuff because, yeah, I'm actually wondering what's going to happen with all the material, because I don't know if you know, but Barry died not too long ago, right? Yes, just, I mean, it hasn't been very long. And yeah, bless her. I mean, she has helped so many people. She was an incredible person who turned her life around to redeem herself, because she was one of the founding members of Centrepoint. She was she ran the Centrepoint magazine. She did the propaganda for Potter. Yeah, she was a fanatical follower, and then later turned into an angry disbeliever. So because she'd been my main informant, so to speak, she was like an archive for Centrepoint. And also she was a fact checker for me until the very end. I mean, she was already, riddled with cancer and almost dying, and she was still answering emails when I had a question. And amazing woman. So I trusted her completely. I knew where she stood. I knew she's very, very reliable. And I also knew that her relationship with her own daughters, or at least some of them, was very severe because of what happened, because she took them to Centrepoint, because they didn't make that choice, but she did. And they were angry still at her for what had happened there. And I don't know all the ins and outs. She could never really go there with me, because she had to, promise her daughters that she would keep that private. And I want to respect that. But I think that's also, it's one of the layers we just talked about. One of those layers is also that she, to some degree, had lost her daughters. Not all of them, but it was difficult, yeah? And they would not talk to her about Centrepoint. She could not talk to them about Centrepoint. She talked to everyone else about it, to me and other survivors and journalists, but I felt it was a taboo in her own family. And maybe, who knows, maybe that's also what drove her, maybe then to help others even more. So when I met Louise, the girl in the caravan in my book, because she lived on the Centrepoint grounds at 11 years old, she moved there when she was 10, and her sexual abuse started 3 months later after she arrived there. And then she later lived in a caravan alone on the property, because children there were usually separated from their parents, and she barricaded herself with junk in this caravan to stop men from coming to her at night. And her story really was a changing point for me, and moved me really, really deeply, and shocked me, and brought me to tears, and just left me, speechless, not even the right word. It left me angry, because I met her quite, I was already a year and a bit into my research, and I'd met a lot of the deniers, and they're very pleasant, older people of Centrepoint who had their act together and their life together, and who could give me their seemingly sort of measured take on it all. And after I met her, it was like, wow, how can you not get it that you were also responsible for this kind of damage, for someone like her not coping in the world and suffering, and because she's had massive anxiety since then. She's single. Her life has been so affected by what happened to her. So when I met her, and then maybe that's not a great thing either. Maybe I had a bit of a rescue on me, or the lines were already blurred at this stage. I was on a bit of a mission. I wasn't just always, of course, you always try to be objective as a journalist, but you're also yourself. And in order to build this trust and come close to someone like her, and her to trust me, we have to, I'm compassionate. And so I was right in there with her. And I think something really changed from then on. And it was a bit of a slippery slope, because I stepped out of this purely professional role. At the same time, though, I was writing a book, and I wasn't reporting about Centrepoint for a newspaper. So I think if I'd been in a in a clear media role, I probably wouldn't have done what I did then. But because I thought, well, this is my book, I can basically do whatever I want. And if I want to experience something here with this survivor, then it's not like there's a media law against that. So I just thought I'd just do the right thing. And I bring her together with Leslie. And she was really open to that. And so, yeah, basically like a lost mother and a lost daughter, because Louise, the girl in the caravan, her mum had died a long time ago, and she was very, very alone. And I know that she has never had an apology from anyone from Centerpoint, apart from the former commune doctor, who actually wrote a letter to her later in life, full of guilt and remorse. And that was a heartfelt letter. And she always had that. And I've seen the letter because it was in a stack of poems and court files and photocopies and things that I got from her. So I brought Barry and her together. And yeah, I'm probably not going to go through it minute by minute now, otherwise it's going to take very long. It is in my book, but the nuance or the surprising thing for me was that at first they were very, very nice to each other, interested in each other. And clearly Louise wanted to get something from Barry. She wanted to finally, I think, see someone showing some remorse or acknowledging what had happened to her. And what she got instead was a lot of explanation about why things were the way they were, and why the adults didn't really know, and they were all under pressure from Bert. And it was kind of excruciating to watch, because I could see that if Barry had only been able to actually say, I am so sorry, it would have made a big difference. And then when Louise finally left, Barry tried to help her. She gave her a list of therapists, and she said, I'm in your team, I'm here to help. But I think the emotional move that she could have made that would have really made a difference, she wasn't really able to do that. And I still don't know until today why, what it was. And she later told me she said so many apologies to her children, and she's been awake every night thinking she should kill herself because of her guilt. So her explanation to me was, all this guilt doesn't help. She's been there, she's done that, it doesn't help. She's here to inform people so that this doesn't happen again. And I get that. At the same time, I thought, yeah, but with this person in front of you, yeah. So it's really complex. And then it showed me a lot about these different layers, these different factions, the expectations, the hurt, the unresolved trauma, the lack of acknowledgement, the lack of accountability, all of that. It was all there in that room.
That is the end of part 1 of this mini-series with Anke Richter about her book Cult Trip. To find out more about Anke, please follow the links in the episode description. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault Podcast.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to chumbacasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at chumbacasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.